Okay, this is a recorded interview. Today is Monday, February 22nd. It's 5:40 p.m. for Organic News on Awake Radio with CIA torture whistleblower John Kiriakou. And we're going to, I've interviewed you a few times before, John. Thank you so much. Awake Radio is having a bit of technical difficulty, so I'm just recording interviews and then they're going to play them. So thank you for joining me, John Kiriakou.
Oh, sure. It's always great to be on the show. Thank you very much for inviting me.
We just had like a pretty lengthy discussion before I started recording, and whistleblowing and standing up for what's right doesn't really seem to be paying off much in this free country that we call America. Is what
Right.
we've concluded from everything that we just talked about. But we're going to discuss yesterday's Washington Post article on Jeffrey Sterling, who is currently serving a 3.5-year sentence in a prison in Englewood, Colorado. He went in June of 2015 and will not get out until 2018, and he has been convicted of leaking information about a Russian scientist trying to give faulty nuclear plans to screw up the Iranian nuclear weapons program to James Risen of the New York Times.
That's right.
But it was after Jeffrey Sterling was already fired from the CIA because he filed a lawsuit because he felt discriminated against while working for the CIA for almost 10 years, approximately.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah, Jeffrey tells a very pointed story about that experience. He is fluent in Farsi. He's an expert on Iran, and he was hired to be a case officer, an operations officer. That's a field officer, a field agent, working against the Iranians. And so he was assigned to go, I think he said it was to Germany. And then right before he was to leave, his boss pulled him aside and said, "We decided not to send you to Germany because we think that a big black guy speaking Farsi would stick out." And he said, "When did you realize I was black?" But they ended up assigning him to a country somewhere in Africa. Well, the officer who was going to go to Germany in replace of Jeffrey ended up resigning. And so they came back and told Jeffrey, "We decided to send you to Germany instead." Well, he had already sent all of his belongings to Africa. He said, "No, I don't want to go to Germany now. I'm going to go to Africa instead." And they said, "No, you're going to go to Germany, and if you don't want to go to Germany, then you can just resign, or you can be fired." So he resigned and filed a racial discrimination suit, which was well-founded, saying that he was discriminated against initially because he was black, and they wouldn't send him to Germany in the first place. The CIA did not argue the merits of that case. They went to the judge and they said that they wanted the case to be dismissed with prejudice because the only way for the agency to defend itself was to expose classified information. Now that's nonsense. That's the national security defense. And that's what they use all the time to protect themselves. So the judge, it's the Eastern District of Virginia. It's the espionage court. They do anything the CIA tells them to do. The judge dismissed Jeffrey's case with prejudice. Well, James Risen, a 2-time Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist with the New York Times, was covering, for the Times, Jeffrey's racial discrimination suit. So because he was covering the case, he and Jeffrey spoke something like 52 times over the course of several years. In the meantime, Risen came out with a book called Bush at War, and one of the chapters in that book details a botched case where the CIA tried to recruit a Russian nuclear scientist to get him to pass flawed nuclear plans to the Iranians.
Was it state of war?
A state of war, that's right. No, was it state of war or Bush at war?
It says in the article it was called state of war.
State of war, then that's what it was. So when the book was published, the CIA just was apoplectic. They said that the whole operation was classified at the top secret level, and it must have been Jeffrey who gave it to him, right? Because Jeffrey's disgruntled. Well, listen, I had many private conversations with Jeffrey Sterling, and he looked me in the eye and he told me I was not Risen's source. Now listen, again, Risen was a 2-time Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. No New York Times journalist would write an article, let alone a book, using one source. Risen generally has dozens of sources. But the agency decided to go after Jeffrey.
But they go after him because they just decided that it was him. Like, where was the evidence and the facts?
You know what? I'm not even sure that they did really decide that it was him. I think that they decided that they were going to teach him a lesson.
Right.
He had sued them, he had spoken to the press, and by God, they were going to silence this guy.
So it becomes like emotional and personal rather than anything
It's always,
based on
yes.
facts.
You're right. It's always personal. And the goal, and I said this at the National Press Club the other day when we did the event for Jeffrey with his wife Holly, the goal is not just to prosecute. The goal is to ruin the person personally, professionally, financially, to separate him from his friends and his relatives, and to frighten other would-be whistleblowers so that nobody talks, that the secrets are kept. And that's what happened to Jeffrey.
Again, before I started the recording, I brought up the case of the guy. I'm sorry, again, I just like his name just keeps escaping me. Who they held in solitary confinement for 43 years.
Right.
In Illinois, in
Louisiana.
And again, that case was purely personal.
Absolutely. And most of these egregious cases are indeed personal.
There's no justice at all.
No. You know, there was a guy in prison with me. I never learned his name, but I'd see him on the track every day. And so in the summertime, he would take off his shirt, and he had this monumental tattoo on his back that made me laugh the first time I saw it. But it made me think afterwards, and I thought, you know, there's really something to this tattoo. It was a tattoo of Lady Justice, and she's holding her scales, and she has her blindfold on, but she is laying on the ground with her right arm up as if to protect herself. And the owner of the tattoo, the guy whose back the tattoo is on, is standing above her, pointing a .45 at her. And he says, "Take that, bitch." And I laughed the first time I saw it. It was very clever. It was very ornate. But I said, you know what? There's a lot to this. Because there's no justice in the justice system.
Right.
Not when we have people in solitary confinement for 43 years. Not when we have people in ADX Supermax who've not seen another human being in 8 years, as the New York Times Magazine outlined. You know, not when we have mandatory minimum sentences for minor drug offenses that land people in prison in many cases for the majority of their lives. That's not justice. And this is what happened to Jeffrey Sterling. There's no justice for Jeffrey Sterling.
Everything is a business.
Yeah.
And so the case of Jeffrey Sterling, it signified Obama's crackdown on I wrote truth tellers, but the article uses the word leakers.
Yeah. You know, this is a problem with the mainstream media, and it's not monolithic. But many major outlets still refer to all of us, to Jeffrey, to Tom Drake and Jesselyn Radak, and to me as leakers rather than whistleblowers. Now, the New York Times calls us whistleblowers. CNN calls us whistleblowers. but the Washington Post and Politico, for example, call us leakers.
Right.
The LA Times and the Boston Globe call us whistleblowers, but MSNBC calls us leakers. Fox calls us traitors. So, there's really no, you get no relief from most outlets in the mainstream media.
And unless more people like on the inside, do what you, Jeffrey Sterling, and others like Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden have done, the few people who do are always going to be seen as the troublemakers.
Yes, always.
Okay, we don't have you don't have a lot of time. We have 10 minutes. So it says in the article, Jeffrey Sterling is tutoring other inmates. He's finishing his memoir written by hand because he can't. He has to mail it to his wife to type it.
Yeah. I wrote 2 books by hand, and I sent them out to my wife and typed them when I got home. But I'm talking about 94,000 words that I wrote by hand, and that's exactly what Jeffrey's doing too. You're only allowed to have a pen and some paper. You certainly have no access to a computer.
He holds his head high, but he does admit to feeling low some days.
Yeah, this is another thing too, Kat, is the role of depression.
Yeah.
In our prisons. Something like 80% of prisoners, at least in the federal system, take some form of antidepressant. There's no hope for most of these guys. This is something that I asked Jeffrey's wife Holly to pass back to him. I said, I know that it feels, he has 3.5 years, and I know it feels like 30 years. I know because I've been there myself. But it really isn't a very long period of time. Once you get past that first year with halfway house and good behavior time off and house arrest, I said 3.5 years is really about 2 years. Once you finish that first year, you can actually start counting down to release. I think he's finally figured that out, but now he's even more worried about what kind of work, a guy who's been convicted of 7 counts of espionage can hope to get to support his family.
That's it. Just it too. When you're out of prison, you're not exactly free.
No, and he's got I think it's 2 years of federal probation when he's done. But like all the rest of us who have been involved in national security cases, he's lost his federal pension. He lost the right to vote. He's an attorney, and he's been disbarred because of his conviction. So, where does he work? Is he going to work at Target or at McDonald's or at Starbucks? If he's lucky. If he's lucky, he will.
That's what, I'm just going to say it. I mean, that's what this system wants to do. It wants to just reduce everyone to...
Yes.
That's what I mean about you're not necessarily even free like when you're out here, because there's so many people out here just, who don't have really good paying jobs and are, stuck, working. I mean, they don't even have a decent, wage to pay people.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Holly told me that Jeffrey's making something like $16 a month. Or no, it was less than that. He makes 50 cents a day tutoring.
Wow.
So he makes $2.50 a week, $10 a month. So I said, you know what? I made $1.08 a month. So if he's making $10 a month, he's doing pretty darn well for himself.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he is inmate 38338-044.
Yes.
and he's taking classes in checking and savings account, so that when he gets released, that's going to help him to get released to a halfway house.
Well, no, he'll get released to a halfway house regardless of what he does, just because it's his right to go to a halfway house. Well, it ought to be his right to go to a halfway house. I got no halfway house time at all because I was writing blogs from prison about problems in prison. And so I did every single day of my sentence. I didn't get any relief at all. But he's really doing it the way you're supposed to do it. He's keeping his head down. He's minding his own business. He's trying to help other inmates by teaching a GED prep class. I told him legally he's allowed to have up to 12 months of halfway house time. And what that really means is 2 weeks, and then they just send you home, and the rest of it converts into house arrest. I said, realistically, you're probably going to get 6 months. But 6 months plus 3 months of house arrest, that's 9 months, getting out 9 months early and going home. Plus your good time, which is 15% of your total time, which is another 6.5 months. That's 15.5 months off of a 42-month sentence. So it's barely over 2 years. I said, you can do that. You can do 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, if he has the support out here, that will definitely help him too.
That's right. And that's what he needs. He needs the support of the community. The guy is a whistleblower. He's not a criminal. He's not a leaker. No matter what the CIA wants you to believe, no matter what the Justice Department wants you to believe, the guy is the victim here. Jeffrey Sterling is the victim.
Right. It amazes me how automatically, so many people just side with the system or the official story, always against, the one single person. And it doesn't ever enter people's mind, or maybe it's just too challenging for people to ever think that it's the system who is the guilty party.
Right.
Or the people, working in the system, like in the case of, his Mr. Woodfox, who they just let out of solitary confinement for 43 years. And, I mean, he was basically held without any evidence or facts. I mean, it literally became personal.
Oh, it was personal. Yeah.
On the part of the judge.
You can't give somebody back 43 years. And, I'm amazed, too, at how the guy at least seems to be, he seems to have his mental faculties. How a person can not go completely insane after 43 years in solitary confinement. And I will add that the United Nations has described solitary confinement as it's practiced in the United States as a form of torture.
Absolutely.
So this guy has been tortured for 43 years. And he seems to hold no bitterness for the people who did this to him.
Well, that's because he's right. He's not in his right mind. That's what I would think. But he is filing a lawsuit, though. There is a lawsuit.
Yes.
And also in the article on Jeffrey that is in the Washington Post yesterday, it says that James Risen of the New York Times could come forward to exonerate Jeffrey Sterling. But he through an attorney, he doesn't give any comment.
That's been a tough issue. I know Risen personally, and Risen took this whole thing very, very badly too. I know that Norman Solomon of exposedfacts.org, who's been a great and true friend to Jeffrey and great supporter, has said that there are no hard feelings and there's no ill will. It's true that Risen could have gone on the stand and he could have said, Jeffrey Sterling was not my source for the book. And he never did that. What he did was he refused to testify, period. Now, his position was, if he had gone up onto the stand and had said that Jeffrey wasn't the source, that would have opened him up to follow-on questions from the prosecution, and if he had refused to answer those, he could have been held in contempt of court. Now, some people would argue that that's what a man would have done. A man would have stood up and he would have taken his lumps. Reisman was not sent to prison for contempt of court, but at the same time, he didn't help Jeffrey's cause in any way.
And so his wife, she's gonna stand by him, and
She's a rock solid supporter.
Yeah.
They have a very strong and loving marriage, and he's going to rely very much on her when he gets home.
yeah.
And he's lucky to have her, just like I was lucky to have my wife. So many whistleblowers don't have that kind of support. So many whistleblowers see the breakup of their family while the rest of their life is just crashing down around them. But neither Jeffrey nor I had to deal with that.
So let me see. Yeah, right. It's 6:00. Okay, John. Our time is up.
It's great to speak with you, as always.
Yeah, I mean, anything that you need to share, just let me know. And so exposefacts.org.
Yes, exposefacts.org. And they have something called the WHISPER program. That's the Whistleblower Protection. I forget what the R stands for. Whistleblower Protection and something. But, if you're thinking of blowing the whistle on waste, fraud, abuse, or illegality, or threats to the public health or public safety, you're going to need an attorney, and a good one. And that attorney is Jesselyn Radak at exposefacts.org.
Thank you so much, John Kiriakou.
Great to speak with you.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Okay, good night.